This is my 157th video on my work with OO gauge. See part 1 of this series for my reasons for getting into OO gauge when I already had a lot invested in working in N gauge and I didn't really have space available for a large, fully operational OO gauge layout. Also see my series on my N gauge railway modelling for smaller and more complex scenery and smaller scale trains running. This part is another rolling stock review and running session, this time of some quite unusual rolling stock with which I'm particularly pleased. The star of the show will be a Wrenn Coronation Class locomotive, the City of Liverpool in LMS Crimson livery, and the supporting cast this time will be some Hornby LMS Stanier coaches that have been very nicely fitted out with detailed interiors with passengers and battery-operated lighting. Here's the locomotive model as it arrived in its original Wrenn box. I bought this on eBay UK. I paid £145 for it, plus postage to Canada. That's quite a substantial price for an old model comparative to what you'd pay for a lot of more recent, highly detailed items, although those do seem to be moving further skywards these days. These old Wrenn models do really hold their value, and there are good reasons for that. And this model was in excellent condition and offered for sale as fully serviced and remagnetized, which of course is a substantial value in itself and a reassurance. Here's the end of the box. Wrenn made very nice models, but they did tend to be a bit vague about naming and classifying them, and they apparently didn't care all that much about prototypical accuracy. I suppose you can call this loco a city if you want to. It does have city in its name, but as regards its class, it's an LMS Coronation Class locomotive, the same class as the streamlined Coronations that I've featured before, but without streamlining in this case. When the cover was removed from the Wrenn box, there was another folded-over cover inside. Wrenn did a good job of packaging their models, not fancy, but offering solid protection to get the models to the customers without damage. When I lifted the inner cover, this was the view. The loco and tender were wrapped in tissue paper, and there was an original Wrenn instruction manual booklet wrapped around. The model was also protected by Wrenn's characteristic bits of cardboard tubing serving to protect the couplings, etc. With the tissue paper unfolded, I could finally see the model. Cardboard tubes on either end protected things, and also one between the loco and tender, and for some reason I got one packing peanut. You can see already that this model was in excellent condition for its age. Though the tooling is older, dating back to Hornby, this model itself would have been produced in the 1970s, I believe. Wrapped around the model was the original Wrenn manual. It was rather foxed, and it was hard to flatten it out, since it had been rolled up for a long time. I tried to photograph the manual, but it wasn't coming out well, as the paper was shiny and it was hard to get it to lie down flat. So I resorted to scanning the manual instead, considerably more time-consuming, but hopefully it will show the contents better. This seems to be a standard manual covering pretty much all of Wrenn's locomotive models. The models are listed on the front of the pamphlet, at least the ones that this applies to. I know Wrenn did make a couple more models later. I now have all of the ones listed here that fit or nearly fit my OO gauge prototype of pre-World War II LMS operations. The 8F freight, i.e. the Stanier 8F, the 264BR tank, which I have as sold by Wrenn themselves in LMS livery, so I pretend it's one of the earlier LMS 264 tanks, and what is called the City class here, i.e. the LMS Coronation Class. This scan also includes the back of the pamphlet, which concludes the oiling and disassembly instructions for the West Country and Coronation Class models. Pages 2 and 3 feature some rather interesting old notes on powering Wrenn's loco models. Pages 4 and 5 deal with aspects of oiling and disassembly for the Castle Class, West Country and 8F models. Pages 6 and 7 move on to brush replacement instructions for the Castle, West Country and 8F models. Pages 8 and 9 move on to oiling points for the 264 tank, A4 and Coronation models. Finally, pages 10 and 11 conclude the brush replacement instructions and deal with various other running and coupling issues. It particularly interested me to see that instructions were included here for converting the model from tension lock coupling to simplex coupling for use with Hornby 00 stock. I was considering doing this. That's it for the manual. I put it aside. I didn't put it back in the box as I didn't want to roll it up again. Here are the Loco and tender with the protective cardboard tubes removed. It appears that this model hasn't been run very much, or at least that it's been handled very gently, as the paintwork is almost in as-new condition, with only very small flaws in the decoration. Here's a close-up of just the Loco. As is typical with Wrenn, this is a very heavy model with a cast metal body. The valve gear is very well modelled, although made a little more robustly than with modern super-detailed models. I can't resist commenting here that this model is inherently inaccurate. The City of Liverpool was never actually finished by the LMS in crimson livery. The City of Liverpool was built during the war and was initially finished in plain wartime black. After the war, it had some lining added to its black livery, but it was never finished in crimson. I can't really imagine why Wrenn chose to model the City of Liverpool in crimson. They could easily enough have chosen one of the Coronation Class Locos that were built before the war without streamlining and were finished in crimson. Those were all Duchesses, if I recall correctly, the first being the Duchess of Buccleuch, built in 1938. There were 4 or 5 of them, all named after Duchesses: Athol, Abercorn, and a couple of others. Here's the tender for this model, just a passive connection, no tender pickups or anything, but the model doesn't really have any problems picking up power given how large and heavy the Loco is. The tender is quite nice without being very fancy. I got the model onto my little test track for an initial running test. It ran fine forwards and backwards, which I was really expecting given that it was sold as fully serviced and remagnetized. It was a bit jerky starting, indicating that it could benefit from some running in. Here's the back of the model. Nothing really separately fitted on the tender, but it looks quite decent. These models, of course, inherited the Hornby 00 philosophy of being made as much for play as for adult modelers. Here's the model from the front seen on the test track. Not much separately fitted on the Loco either, other than the handrail and a coupling hook on the front buffer, but no actual working front coupling. So long as you don't crush the valve gear, you shouldn't have any problem handling this model. I took the tender down to the workbench as I was interested in the idea of possibly fitting this model with a simplex coupling so that it could be used with Hornby 00 stock and similar. As described in the manual, the tension lock coupling is riveted on, which was a bit of a shame since it meant that it couldn't really be removed non-destructively. There was a mounting point for a simplex coupling seen here under the tension lock coupling, although I didn't have the exact type of simplex coupling used by Wrenn, so I'd have to fiddle a bit to fit something. I did remove the tender body. The chassis was die-cast, but the body was a single cast plastic part. I put the tender back together and I left it fitted with the tension lock coupling for now. I do have a Hornby 00 2-rail Coronation Class coming, so I will have one to run with Hornby 00 stock, so it probably makes more sense to leave this one with a tension lock coupling and run it with more modern coaches. I got the model railed up on my Hornby layout and ran it in, using my baby monitor to keep a check on it from another room. The model ran in for its 30 minutes forwards with no problems at all, quite a contrast with the more recent Hornby models of the Coronation Class, which gave me all sorts of derailing problems until I worked on modifying their front bogies. The model also ran in for 30 minutes backwards without any derailing. However, I did notice that the tender seemed to be bobbling about a lot as it ran, especially when running backwards. I thought that the bobbling might be resulting from poor gauging, so I took the tender back to the bench to check its gauging. That's 13.95 millimeters shown there. All of the axles were rather under 14 millimeters. I re-gauged the axles a little wider, as would be more standard. I also noticed that the tender wheels were quite dirty, so I cleaned them with a brass brush on a rotary tool. And I oiled the tender axles. Unfortunately, all of this just made the tender run worse rather than better. The problem was that the tender has 3 axles spaced quite far apart. If the wheels were gauged so that the flanges pressed firmly against the rails, the tender couldn't get round curves. The curving of the track would push the wheels up off the rails. The axles don't have any ability to move from side to side to help with this. So really, the only way for the tender to get round curves was for the wheels to be gauged somewhat narrowly to allow for the curved track pushing in different directions without pushing the wheels right off. This problem could have been avoided by having no flanges on the centre set of tender wheels. That was done on the Loco. The centre driving wheels on the Loco are without flanges. I didn't really want to remove the flanges on the centre tender wheels, so I changed the gauging back to make it more narrow, but I had to take care not to make the gauging so narrow that the guide rails on points would derail the wheels. Having basically run in the Wrenn Loco and got it working quite well, I wanted to couple it up with some coaches and run it with a train. I bought these coaches quite a while ago, and they've been sitting in my testing area ever since. These coaches were fitted with battery-operated lighting, other than the mail coach, which is a random extra that just came with the others. Here you can see them all with the lighting turned on. In addition to being fitted with lighting, the coaches had passenger figures added to their interiors. So even without the lights turned on, they look quite nicely detailed. The lights were turned on via little slide switches fitted to the ends of the coaches. The reason that these coaches sat around for a long time without being used was basically simply that I couldn't figure out how I was supposed to get at the batteries. There had to be a way to disassemble things so that the batteries could be changed as needed, but I couldn't tell how the disassembly should be done, and I was leery of using much force for fear of breaking things. Finally, at this point, I tried to ease the roof off one of these coaches, and rather than the roof coming off, the whole body separated from the chassis at the end. As you can see here, there were little metal clips on the bottom of the ends of the bodies, and these clipped into grooves in the chassis, holding things together. I don't think this is how Hornby made the coaches. Well, perhaps they did, I don't know. It certainly seems that someone has done substantial work on these coaches. With the ends unclipped, the whole body could be removed, so here you can see the interior of one of the composite coaches, nicely fitted out with passengers, although their clothing does seem a bit gaudy for the period. The glazing was very nice as well, being made of very solid pieces and not at all flimsy. I thought at first that there was an inaccuracy as the lavatory windows were not whited out, but when I looked closely I saw that the glazing of the lavatory windows was in fact frosted. Quite a nice touch, although I'm not sure that white blinds wouldn't be more prototypical. The lighting was fitted in the form of LED strips running along the centre of the roof, powered by a flat-type battery at the end. I think that I have some batteries of this type on hand, and if I remember rightly, they can be had fairly cheaply. Altogether a very neat job. And looking at this picture, I see that the clips on the ends of the body are not in fact metal, but just cast into the plastic. So they probably are original from Hornby. I got 5 of these coaches plus the mail coach, 3 composites and 2 brakes. Here's one of the brakes disassembled, much the same principle, but the interior is only partial, and so the battery holder hasn't been fitted quite so neatly because there's no need for it. I railed 3 of the coaches up with the Wrenn Loco on my Hornby layout. I ran them first without the lighting turned on, but then I turned on the lighting in the coaches and turned down the lighting in the room. I've never tried to set up my layout for nighttime running, so there are no lights in the buildings, etc., but it was still quite nice to see these lighted coaches running round and be able to see the passengers sitting and standing inside. So now, as usual, I'll finish with some running video of this train. So, here's the Wrenn City of Liverpool Coronation Class, railed up with 3 of these mainline coaches. Now, I don't have the lights on in the coaches now because you wouldn't be able to see them with this much light around anyway. I will try afterwards to see if I can do a run in lower light so that you can see the lights in the coaches. I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do that, but I'll see what I can do. I don't think there's much point trying to run around in total darkness, but hopefully if I run around in some kind of partial light, you'll be able to see what's happening and also see the lights in the coaches. We'll see. But for now, there are no lights in the coaches. So you can at least see the engine properly. This engine's run fine. The only problem I've had with it has been with the tender. The tender's a little tricky because, you know, it's got 3 axles spaced out quite widely, and they don't move from side to side at all, and they've all got flanges on, so it's a little tricky getting them gauged in such a way that it can go around curves okay and also get over the points okay. If you gauge them too wide, they tend to ride off the rails on the curves. If you gauge them too narrow, they tend to catch the guide rails on the points. And unfortunately, virtually at the best that I can manage, there's a certain amount of bobbling. We'll see. Well, of course, now it's got a train behind it, I don't really know how it'll behave. Give it some power. Go on. Starts off a bit more smoothly now I've run it in. It had been reserviced when I got it and remagnetized, but I ran it in and it definitely seems to have smoothed out with the running in. That's 50% power, almost dead on. Quite a nice sort of passenger speed, fairly fast but not super express. This is a really nice looking engine. I think it's not super detailed like modern engines, but it's got real presence, you know. It's certainly got weight. I'm doing my kneeling down thing now to try and give you that sort of perspective on the train. But, oh dear. It's really hard for me to get back up again when I kneel down. These are, what, 60-foot Stanier, you know, stock, typical of the sort of introduced towards the end of the 30s. They might well have run with this locomotive. Mind you, they wouldn't have run with this particular locomotive in this colour because this particular locomotive never ran in this colour, but they could have run with one of its sisters, like the Duchess of Buccleuch or whatever, which did run in this colour before the war. Alright, I'm going to stop him now, and then I'm going to try and put the lights on, which have to be switched on with those little switches at the end, and modify the lighting in the room so hopefully you can see them. So now I have the lights on in the coaches. You may not see them much at the front here where there's more light, but hopefully as we go round you will be able to see them more round the back there where it's a bit darker. And this is about the best I can do. I mean, I don't see there's much point running in complete darkness because you wouldn't, well, it wouldn't be very realistic anyway, because then you wouldn't see the Loco at all. But you can see there that the lights are on in the coaches. They're a bit dimmer in the middle coach, basically, I think, because his battery's a bit run down there. You know, they're battery-operated lights. And you can see the people inside the coaches, which is rather nice. They're battery-operated lights, and the battery in the middle one's a bit run down, I guess. Sorry, my camera works less than ideal here. I'm trying to control everything at once, but that's rather nice. There you can see the lighted coaches there. going round the corner. 2 composites and a brake I put on. I've got 1 more brake and 1 more composite. Yeah. Quite nice. I'm quite pleased with those. And it's not just the lights. I mean, it's nice that they have, you know, the people inside them and everything. They're the most realistic coaches I've got, I think, with that. You know, it just makes them more realistic. Very nice. Back to the front again. Slowing down a little here. Train tends to slow down back there anyway. I think maybe rather than stopping where I usually stop at the front here, maybe we'll stop at the back, because then at least you can see. Stop there, say, perhaps, because then you can see the coaches, the lights in the coaches more. There you go.